In this example problem, we are going to make a forecast using time series data for a set of information where there's a pretty obvious seasonal trend. E-commerce retail sales have increased substantially during the 2010s. This file that we have contains the quarterly sales amounts of e-commerce sales over the entire decade of the 2010s. So there's 4 quarters in a year. We have 10 years with information. That's 40 quarters worth of sales figures that we have. We are going to analyze this file accounting for seasonal variability, firstly by creating dummy variables which make the first 3 quarters of the year binary, and we're going to label these variables as D1, D2, and D3 for dummy 1, dummy 2, and dummy 3. And we're also going to make a variable that helps us better represent our time. If I scroll over, as you can see right now, we have the first quarter of 2010, the second quarter of 2010, the third quarter of 2010, etc. Well, it's really hard for Excel to track in a timeline what these numbers mean, whether the two of them, so let's just reorder it in terms of the number of quarters. In other words, we're going to label them quarter 1 through quarter 40. So let's first start with our dummy variables. What we want here is any information that happens during the first quarter. We want the dummy 1 variable, which represents is this in the first quarter, to show a 1. It's binary, so yes or no, with 1 being yes. We would want a 1 here, and if it's in the first quarter, it can't be in the second, third, or fourth quarter, which is the omission of all of these, so those would have to be 0. So if I wanted it to be painful, I could literally type in 1, 0, 0 to denote that this is happening during the first quarter, not the second quarter, not the third quarter, and because they're not all zeros, not the fourth quarter either. That being said, that's kind of a pain to have to go and do that. If we want to use the fill handle, we would have to do that for 40 individual lines. So what I can do to make this easier on myself is I can use the if function. And I'll actually go to this thing and grab the if function. So if go, and I want just regular if. My logical test in this case is going to be, is the quarter number that we have equal to 1? And if that is true, I want it to return a 1. But if it's not true, I want it to return a 0. So that's the way that I would set this guy up, and my formula would say if B2 equals 1, then 1. If not, then 0. And I hit OK. And now I can fill handle by double-clicking the corner. And let's just make sure that everything's working out. Yep, everything that happened during the first quarter is getting a 1 return for this dummy variable. Over here, for dummy variable 2, I can do pretty much the same exact thing, but now I don't want the logical test to be, is this figure that we have equal to 1? I want to have it, is it equal to 2? Because I'm in the dummy variable for the second quarter of the year. And if that's true, I want it to be a 1. And if it's false, I want it to be a 0, and I'm going to hit OK. And let's fill handle in here and make sure that it returned a 1 for every second quarter that we have, and we're looking like our if formula is working good here. And then I'll do the same thing one more time for the third quarter. So if my logical test is does my quarter equal 3? So B2 equals 3. If that is true, I want it to return a 1. If it's false, I want it to return a 0. I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to fill handle and check one more time. Yep, we have a 1 in that spot for everything that's marked third quarter. And while we're here, everything that's marked the fourth quarter has 0, 0, 0, which it should. So we're looking pretty good there. Last thing is we want to have a variable, t, which is just the ordering of the quarters that we had. Instead of saying Q1 of 2010, Q2 of 2010, going to Q1 of 2011, whatever, let's just put them right in order of what they are. This is quarter 1. This is quarter 2, this is quarter 3, this is quarter 4, and after I start it, I can go and highlight them all, and I can double click the quarter and corner, and it'll fill in all of my quarters, and I have 1 through 40 in that column, so everything's set up the way that I want it to be. Our second requirement here, requirement B, is that we create a scatter plot which plots T against sales in order to confirm the existence of a trend in seasonality. So for a scatter plot, you always want the x-axis to be your first number on the left-hand side, and you want your y-axis to be on the right-hand side of that. So what I can do is I can move what I want to be on the right-hand side over by shift and dragging until it's on the spot where I want it. It looks really good to me right there. And then I can highlight all of this, Control Shift down to grab everything, and I'm going to insert a scatter plot. And I'll do the lines for the sake of ease. And again, if you want to label this and make it all fancy, you totally can. But what we're looking for, is there an observable linear trend? Well, what happens when I put a linear trend line in? Yeah, there absolutely is. Like it's snaking immediately through all the information that we have. Sales are going up. Secondly, is there seasonality? And look at that bump that we have every fourth quarter. 1, 2, 3, fourth quarter goes up. 5, 6, 7. That'd be the fourth quarter of the second year. It goes up. What's happening here? During the fourth quarter of the year, which is conveniently Christmas season, e-commerce sales are consistently shown to be spiking each and every period. So we know that a linear regression model is going to work. Let's use the data analysis toolpack to estimate and interpret this linear trend, accounting for that seasonal variability that we have right here for e-commerce sales, using the 4 variables, orange headers, that we created during the period. So I'm going to go to Data, grab the Data Analysis toolpack, grab our buddy the regression function, and then my Y range that we're predicting for is what is sales going to be. So I'm going to grab the entirety of our sales column. My input range is going to be the 4 variables that we created, our quarterly variables, our dummy variables, and our T variable for the time. I'm going to throw all that in. I want my labels to be on, and for the output range, I'm going to select something right underneath where our information is. Right there in I-16 looks good to me. I'm going to hit OK. And there we go. We got our regression thing. My graph is kind of covering stuff up, so let's just shrink it down so it's not in my way anymore. Perfect. And for the returns that I'm getting over here, intercept of about $45,000. That's our baseline average per quarter. D1, D2, and D3, which are seasonal, our quarterly dummy variables that we have, are all negative. Why? Because they're subtracting and saying that sales during each quarter are going to be this amount less than our main amount. Well, if we don't have a dummy for 4 and everything that we had was the fourth quarter was 0 and 0, 0, what we're predicting here then is the fourth quarter sales are going to be just about equal to our coefficient. So that accounts for the bumps that we have. Bringing our graph back out one more time. Like we have a setup in here where the first, second, and third quarters are always going to be lower than a certain number, and then it's going to raise in the fourth quarter when the return for D1, D2, and D3 is all 0 up to a higher point. But now we also have to account for the fact that it is steadily increasing over time, which is what the T variable is doing. Every single period that passes, every single quarter, we're expecting our sales to go up about $2,867 from the previous quarter. So with that, I can fill in my numbers. And let me just shrink this down a little bit so I can get all of the information on at one time. For my regression equation that I have, why is it not clicking in the box that I want? Let me just go and flip around and see, maybe I can get it to come back and be good. There we go. This is going to be equal to our intercept plus our coefficient for our first dummy variable plus our coefficient for our second dummy variable plus our coefficient for our third dummy variable plus, if you will, our T coefficient, our coefficient for the time that's elapsing as we're going through and doing this. Before we even go and make an estimate, will this be a predictable estimator of what we have? Well, we've got multiple variables in here, which means I need to use the adjusted R squared, not just the regular R squared, and it comes out to be 0.9514. Super strong predictor of expected sales. We are predicting in this case that about 95% of the relationship between time passing and our increase in sales is going to be captured by this model as we have it set up above. So what is our sales forecast going to be for the first quarter of 2020? Just to be thorough here, our last information that we have is the fourth quarter of 2019, which would make the first quarter of 2020 the next period. And since our T ended at 40, if we had that information here, what we're really predicting for is quarter number 41. So what I can do is I can fill in my regression equation. This is going to be equal to my constant plus, in parentheses, my coefficient for quarter 1 times whether or not this is going to be a first quarter. What would my dummy variable be for the first quarter of 2020 in this case? Well, I would still have a 1 as my return for my binary variable, checking whether it's the first quarter or not, and it's a 1 because yes it is, plus our coefficient for the second variable times my binary return right here. And so this is the first quarter. My return for what is it the second quarter or not would be a 0. The same is true for our third quarter dummy variable. We would take the coefficient that we had right here. And yes, you can omit these if you wanted to, but I just like to be thorough. And the return for that would be 0 as well because it's not the third quarter. Plus the coefficient that we have at the end for our time variable, which is $2,867.84, times what our input would be. And what would our T number be for the very next quarter that we had? Well, we ended on the 40th quarter. We are predicting in Q1 2020 for the 41st quarter. Put all of that information in, I get $138,511.24. We can predict for budgeting purposes, if we are in the e-commerce business, the total e-commerce sales would be $138,511.24. And by the way, I highly doubt this is the total amount of e-commerce sales they have. I bet you these numbers that are expressed here are expressed as in the millions, which means our first quarter sales would actually be $138.5 billion. But when you're working with big information, sometimes it's better just to round off and lob off a few zeros so you have less numbers to work at.